As a wildlife photographer, I am incredibly reliant on my autofocus system to make sure that I capture sharp images out in the field, even if my subject moves quickly or things change in an instant. And I often tell my guests that it's really important to understand your autofocus system so that you're able to optimize its abilities when you're out in the field. So therefore today I want to tell you all about the autofocus systems that we can find in our Sony cameras and explain how you can optimize them when you're out taking photos. Regardless if you're a wildlife photographer like myself, or if you do portraits, landscapes, or just an all-round hobbyist, you need to understand your Sony camera's autofocus system to be able to maximize its potential, and I'm sure you're going to find this video helpful. In today's video, I'll be covering the different focus modes, the different focus areas that we have in our Sony cameras, and I'll also talk about the tracking focus and the face and eye priority in autofocus. My name is Karolina Noree, and I'm a professional wildlife photographer working with Pangolin safaris. And a big part of my job is helping guests while out on safari with me to get the best shots possible. And autofocus is a massive part of that. Today, I'm in the wonderful Madikwe Private Game Reserve, a real hidden gem for wildlife photography in South Africa. If you haven't been here already, I highly suggest you add it to your list. And also a special thank you to Jackie's Lodges for having us. Before we start with the different focus modes that we have available for us in our Sony cameras, I quickly just want to explain how autofocus works, because I find a lot of people get confused by this part, and it's really important to understand before we head into the rest of the video. When you use autofocus, the camera will indicate with a little green square that focus has been achieved. However, it's really important to understand that even if the green square only shows up on one specific spot, anything that is at the same distance as that spot from your camera sensor will also be in focus. This is what we call plane of focus. When we focus with our cameras, whether it be manually or with the autofocus, we're essentially telling our cameras how far away from the camera sensor, which is indicated by this little symbol, we want the focus to be. When focusing manually on our Sony cameras, we can actually see the distance being indicated on the bottom of our screen, showing us the exact distance that we are focusing at. Now, with that covered, let's move on to our different focus modes. Single shot autofocus. In this mode, when you half press the shutter or use the AF on button to achieve focus, the camera only focuses once, and it doesn't refocus even if you keep holding down the button, and even if your subject moves further away or closer to you. For this reason, this mode is best suitable for product photography and maybe landscape photography, but not really for wildlife. Automatic autofocus. Not to be confused with actual autofocus, this mode switches automatically between single shot and continuous, which I'll be covering just now, detecting if the subject is stationary or not. Continuous autofocus. This is the mode that I personally use 99% of the time, because this is when the camera will be continuously trying to achieve focus as you are either half pressing the shutter button or pressing the AF on button if you're using back button focus. This means that if your subject moves closer to you or further away from you, you don't actively have to repress the shutter button or the focus button for the camera to achieve the correct focus. DMF. In this focus mode, you'll first focus automatically using the camera's autofocus system, but then you can make final small adjustments to make sure that you get the perfect focus. Therefore, this is very convenient for macro photography, for example. With wildlife photography, I also recommend turning on full-time DMF. However, this is only available on the newer Sony camera models, but it is very helpful when photographing wildlife and you're struggling to get the focus through a lot of branches and so on, and you just want to give your camera a little bit of direction of where to focus. Manual focus. I personally only use this focus mode when photographing stars because the camera will just struggle in that low light situation with autofocus. I recommend using the camera's focus magnifier to help ensure you get the correct focus. You can turn this on by going to the purple menu, AF/MF, to number 4, Focus Assist, and then turn Auto Magnifier on. Let's move on to the different focus areas that you can use while using autofocus. The area essentially indicates where the camera should be looking for a focus point. Wide focus area. This area covers the whole screen, and the camera will be looking for focus in all parts of the screen. And this is great because you can very much focus on your composition, but only when you have a very clean background. The problem is that when you have a lot of distractions in the scene, the camera might pick up on something different than what you're trying to focus on. Zone focus area. With this focus mode, you have a little bit more control over what part of the scene that you want your camera to be focusing on, because you only have the zones, and you can move these around using the joystick. So you can move it to the left or to the right to fit your composition. It's important to note, however, that as soon as your subject moves out of the zone that you have selected, you will lose focus. Center fixed focus area. This focus area is simply fixed to the very center of the screen, and you can't move this around, which means the camera will only be trying to find focus in the very center of your frame. Spot focus area. This focus area comes in 3 different sizes: small, medium, and large. And this can be very helpful when you're shooting through a lot of foliage because you can be very precise about your focus point. You can also move this around using the joystick on the back of your camera to make sure that you get your desired composition. Expand spot focus area. With this focus area, your camera will prioritize the spot that you have indicated. However, if it fails to find focus in that specific spot, it will also take into consideration the area around it. And this is also flexible using the joystick. While talking about the joystick, it's actually good to know that when you're in a wide focus area, by default, the camera is set to spot focus when you're pressing the joystick, which is a great backup when you're using wide focus and your camera might be struggling to pick up your subject. However, it's good to know that with the flexible focus areas such as zone and spot and expand spot, when you press the joystick, the focus area will by default jump back to the middle of the screen. Lastly, I want to cover one of the most game-changing parts of our autofocus system, and that is tracking focus with the help of eye and face priority. At the very bottom of your focus area menu, you'll find the tracking focus. However, it's good to know that this will only work if you have continuous autofocus on. In this little menu, you'll find all the previously mentioned autofocus areas, and they work exactly the same that I've just explained. However, with one major difference. And that is that when you achieve focus using this area, but your subject moves out of the area, your camera will continue tracking the subject and continue achieve focus as it moves through the frame. So for example, if I'm using spot focusing size medium, and I'm focusing on a bird sitting on a branch, and then all of a sudden the bird takes off from the branch and leaves the little spot that is my focus point, the camera will continue to track the bird as it's flying through the frame without me having to move the camera, which obviously is incredibly helpful in wildlife photography. Traditionally, a camera using autofocus will be looking for contrasting areas to try to achieve focus. However, with newer mirrorless camera bodies, we have an AI chip that is helping us detect eyes and faces of the subjects that we're trying to photograph. You can turn this on by going to the purple AFMF menu and then scroll down to number 3, Face and Eye Autofocus, and turn Face and Eye Priority in Autofocus on. And then you can adjust the settings according to your needs. With the newer camera models, such as the A7R5, the A9 Mark III, and now the A1 Mark II, you have more subject options to select from, and you also have a combined animal and bird option, which I find incredibly helpful on my A7R5. As great as the tracking and AI autofocus system is, it's always good to have a little bit of a backup system. So what I recommend doing is setting up the buttons on your camera in a way where you can either toggle between different focus modes, or if you're using back button focus, you can set up 2 different focus modes on 2 different buttons on the back of your camera. In that way, you'll ensure that you'll always get the sharpest photos. And that is it for this time. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. And don't forget to subscribe to join our growing community of wildlife enthusiasts and not miss any future videos with gear reviews, destination reviews, and more tips and tricks like these.